All right, hello and welcome to today's LSA training for HMIS system administrators. My name is Maria Berg. I'm in product marketing at Ecovia Solutions. Our presenters today are Eric Wilka, HMIS product manager, and Dan Fox, product manager. Just a quick reminder before we turn the webinar over to Eric and Dan, your phone lines will be muted throughout the entire presentation. We invite you to submit questions at any time during the presentation using the question area on the webinar panel. And with that, let's get started.
Thank you, Maria. Welcome, everyone. We will be covering our third part in our series for LSA Readiness. And today, we are going to be looking at some timelines and reminders, messages from Hub that have come out. We'll be looking at the export files. We'll talk through how you work with messages from HDX 2.0, work through the LSA preload files and show you some key ones to look at, and then we'll have some time at the end for question and answer time. So for Q&A, please add them in the Q&A section or the chat window to the presenters. If you can, please reference a specific slide number or a section. We have quite a bit of material to get through, so Dan will be working to categorize those questions so we can answer as many as possible at the end. We do have some handouts for you today, so they will include some documents that aren't up on HUD Exchange yet. So just so you know, these are the most recent specifications and documents that we have. They may be subject to change, but again, just so you have access to them and you can see them and see the information that we have, we thought that would be best to help you out. So we have the specification, we have the dictionary, and we also have a companion document that will try to put the column definitions in more of a narrative format and give you a little bit easier time reading and navigating the columns, hopefully. Some reminders on the timelines. October 31st is the official HDX 2.0 open time, and the 9th, HUD wants you to have at least attempted an upload. So that way, by the end of November, you will have a full system-wide file uploaded into HDX 2.0. Then in December, APT and the review team will begin reaching out. You'll be working with them in January and February to determine if there's any data that needs corrected, what notes do you need to add, all those things, very similar to the previous processes with AHAR. Some reminders that have been posted on the System Administrator Hub that, just again, reminders, COCs have to at least log in and attempt an upload within 10 days. And that's from the 1031 release. So it is perfectly fine if it fails. The key that they're going for is to attempt an upload. Now the messages that you will receive from HDX will, HDX 2.0 will change depending on your data. Maybe you're just missing something you have to correct in your system. It might be something that's on the validation side, but we won't always necessarily know, especially the app team and people working with HDX 2.0, where the issue lies until we start beginning those uploads. And just to reiterate, the submission deadline, end of November, should be thought of as the starting point for your LSA review and correction. It is not meant to be a you have to have 0 data errors and everything's perfect. The HDX 2.0 site is still being actively worked, and between now and the end of November, maybe even after that, there will likely be some changes, corrections. Maybe they were enforcing something before and they aren't anymore. Also, the release that you're working with that you just got last Friday, it is a beta version. So if you are, as you're working with it, the whole goal is to make sure that you have a little bit more time, as much time as possible, to work with those HUD-defined files, get used to them, get used to working with them, what they look like, what your processes are. But it is a beta release, so as we're going through or working through issues, we find out new things we weren't expecting. We get changes in requirements. Expect that release to change. So as we get in the export, you saw when we released on Friday with the release notes of the location of where the report is, what parameters are run. So just to reiterate, there are important parameters. You have your report date range, that's setting your active time frame. You have your scope, that's what's telling HUD if this is a system-wide or if this is project-specific. You have your report COC, and you have your orgs and projects. So this is, the report COC is saying that this export is for Salt Lake City COC, it's for Texas Balance of State. You're identifying, saying that we're only considering enrollment as part of that COC. And orgs and projects give you the ability to control the data included in your reports. Those are by default select all to include everyone in your report. When you click export and you go to Files on Server page, once it's done running, you will see the HMIS LSA 2018 export, and that is the final HDX 2.0 output that that HUD is expecting. You also have the preload files, and these are the raw and summarized client data from the intermediate steps that are output. We'll go through those, the key ones, a little bit later in the presentation, but just so you know, you'll have two sets of files. And the key thing to remember is that when the export is what you need to send up to HDX 2.0, the preload is more information to help you work through your data. So in the export, you have your project data descriptor elements, funder, geography, inventory, organization, and project. These are just files with information about what's in your continuum. We have covered this in depth in the last session, most definitely, and then a little bit before that. So we'll just touch on the fact that those are what are included there. And then today we're going to be sticking more with the report files themselves. And when we say the LSA report files, we mean LSA report CSV, person CSV, household, exit, calculated CSV. This is going to be the data with the information about the clients in your continuum. So when we're looking at the report files, it's looking at client data over a number of years. And we're going to look at all that data for a client. It's going to be for them individually as well as for all the people they've been served together within a household. So we're going to look at all that data, and we're going to summarize information for a client or a particular household. So questions are going to be more, has a client ever been something, which is very different from like the APR or the CAPR, where it's, so for this particular enrollment, did the client have this setting? So it's a very different mindset when we're looking at the data. And what this feeds into is a different perspective on how to look at it. So where you should, we would recommend looking at your aggregate first and then working backwards, because your raw data for a client could sometimes be a lot, because over the period of years, how many enrollments can a client have? So it's much simpler to start with your aggregate data and you work your way back. And so it's just a very different perspective with, to reiterate, something on the APR or anything else where it's, the client on the entry assessment has this value. So how is this going to be counted in the LSA? That's not really how it should be thought of, because based off of all the other data for that client and data from other people in the household for that client, it could be a non-issue. Just keep that in mind. What we're dealing with the LSA is very different than what we've dealt with in the past. In the report files, you'll have aggregate counts of persons, households, some other calculations that are going to meet the combination of variables in a particular row. So you'll see when we get into LSA person, you'll have columns for age, gender, ethnicity. You'll have some data LSA dictionary values, which are going to be different from your HMIS standard. And when you see that row, you'll see a row total, and that'll be the number of people that meet that criteria. LSA person and LSA household look at data in the report time frame. LSA exits will be looking at data from the 2 years prior to the report start up to 6 months in the report time frame, assuming you're running for your federal fiscal year compliance report. And then LSA calculated is just going to be generating more aggregate counts from the data in LSA person, household, and exit. We talked about date ranges. Again, the report range, this is going to be the active cohort. And that's going to be based on what you said on the report launch form. If you're sending it up to HDX for your official system-wide upload, that needs to be dated from 10/1 to 9/30 for the fiscal years. And even though you're setting your date range of 10/1 to 9/30, your exit data is going to be looking at different cohorts. you will have what's identified as cohort 0, which is running from the report start to the 6 months prior to report end. So if you're doing your full year, it's the first 6 months of the reporting period. Cohort -1 is the year prior to your report year, and cohort -2 is 2 years prior to your report year. So when we're talking about date ranges, these are many ones that are going to come into play that are fixed date ranges. As we're getting into the files and you're wondering what makes a person count unique, well, in the file for LSA person, that's going to be the client ID that's in your system. In LSA household, it's going to be the unique combination of the head of household client ID and the household type. In LSA exit, it's going to be the combination of what cohort is it, so is it 0, -1, -2, the client ID of the head of household, and the household type. Head of household is very important in determining unique household, either for LSA household or LSA exit. The report has a method for deduplicating or setting and correcting head of household issues inside of the report, because there can only be one head of household. The LSA will designate a single client to be the head of household if there is 0 or if there is more than 1 in a case ID. In the cases where there's 0 or more than 1, it will set the client with the lowest client ID as the head of household. And that's going to be carried out throughout the report. So as an example of the head of household, you have this household served together in Salvation Army. No one is identified as the head of household, but in this one, because Homer is a client ID of 100, the LSA would set them as the head of household because he has the lowest client ID. Looking at our unique households, over time, a family might be served in many different projects, several different configurations. So we have a family of 3, where Homer's the head of household. We have Marge, that's head of household, another one. Homer came in by himself. Homer came in with Bart on one occasion. So if we're looking at this household and how would that look for you LSA unique households, and if these were all in the active time frame, that would come down to 3, because you have Homer as a head of household with the as a household type of adults with children. You also have Homer again as the head of household in the adults only household type, and then you also have Marge as the head of household with the household type of adults with children. So again, we may have 5 or more individual cases, but when we're looking at this, this is going to be boiled down into 3 unique rows in the LSA household. Using this similar example and looking at it from exits, it really kind of depends on when they exited, because again, the unique row in LSA exit is based on the cohort and the client ID of the head of household and the household type. So here you have your same five households, but if you put an exit on different years and different cohorts, that is returned then as 5 different. Those are counted 5 different times in LSA exit because they go across cohort periods. As we're going into the files, LSA person, this is going to be a count of individuals. Demographics are reported for adults and heads of household. So if there are children under the age of 18 that have never been the head of household in the active time frame, they'll have a lot of -1s. Not that it's bad, not that it's something that should be changed. It is just how the LSA wanted those demographics reported. And then it will also show you the project types a client has been served in based on the household types and whether or not that person has ever been marked as the head of household. LSA person is also where you get your calculations for chronic time. It's going to be based off of time you have in the system, plus after, as we'll see here in a little bit in the flow chart, it also considers 3917 data. It's going to be looking at based off of a 3-year time frame, and that specific range is going to be on a per client basis. It'll look at when are they last active. It'll start several years prior, and it'll be looking at project stays, bed nights, and 3917 information during that date range. as we're looking at multiple projects, you might have some overlap, especially if you're looking at including 3917 dates and you maybe have a bed night and a night-by-night shelter. The LSA runs through a process so that each date will only be counted once, like I said, in case there's anything overlapping. So that way you couldn't have the same day counted once as being housed in permanent supportive housing and also homeless in like a 3917 scenario. So to try to walk you through the chronic homeless, for the time component itself, you have the enrollment history for a client, and one of the first things we're saying, has this person ever been served as an adult or as the head of household? If not, we're not going to worry about their calculation. If they have been served as an adult or head of household, then we're going to be looking for their last active date, and we're going to be setting the particular field called last inactive, and that's used for determining what date range are we going to be looking for chronic data, for project stay data. We're going to be trying to find enrollments active between those dates in your residential project types, and that also have a bed night. So if you're in a night-by-night shelter, we'll be looking specifically for check-ins into those shelters. And then basically the LSA is going to loop through, for each day between the CH start and active. First, are they housed in rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing? Or are they enrolled in transitional housing? If yes, they're going to go into a construct that's called CH exclude. That means that date cannot be used or counted as a homeless date when for determining a length of time homeless. So if it's a date that where the client is not housed in rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, or they're not in transitional housing, it's going to look at, is this a date that's covered in an enrollment in a safe haven or an entry-exit shelter? Is it a night they had a bed night in a night-by-night shelter? Or is this going to be a time that's between your approximate homeless start date and your entry dates? So if any of those are yes, it's going to go into a construct called CH include. And that's basically just CH exclude is time that's not counted, CH include is time that's counted. And then once you have those dates, for each client you have a series of dates. The LSA wants us to order them and just look for, is there a gap of less than 7 days? If yes, you're going to fill that time in, which is a little bit different than how it's looked in system performance, where it's a gap of 1 day counts as a break. This is looking and ordering it a little bit differently, giving a little bit more extended time in that gap. So if there are any gaps or anything, it's going to backfill that time, and then the report is going to identify particular episodes, so CH start, or like an episode start, an episode end, and how many days are in that episode, or in those episodes. And at the very end, you'll have a construct that in the LSA world is called CH episodes, and it's basically when did the episode start, when did it end, and how many days was it. So that's going to be your process of looking at a client's individual data over a period of years, determining exactly how many days are going to be counted as homeless or not for the purposes of the LSA. And once when we have that, the system or the report will look at another series of steps to see, is the total time greater than 365 days? If yes, we're looking, is it any one particular episode? And if so, you will have a particular status set there. If it's not, are we looking at 4 episodes? Again, episodes that's counted by the raw data in project stays. If that's true, we have a different status that'll be coming out on the LSA person file. And then, so if those two aren't true, that's when we're looking at 3917, 4, and 5. So that's the number of times homeless and months homeless in the last 3 years. So that's when it's going to look at 3917 data, and you will have a chronic time status based off of that. And then if all of those criteria have been passed, it's no's all the way down, it'll be looking for any type of unknown, missing, refused, data not collected in any 3917 field. And if that's true, it's going to be setting the CH time status to 99, and it will have a CH time of 365 or less. So the number of days that are counted will still be in there, but the time status is going to be 99. And if we've gone through all that, so maybe everyone has all the 3917 data included, you'll basically have a time status of 3, so it's something other than 4 episodes or 1 continuous, and it's the time homeless has been 365 days or less than that. And these are LSA values. These are not specific number of days categories. If we're looking at LSA household, this is going to be looking at the counts of households based on the unique combination of the client ID of the head of household and the household type. So going back to our example before, you may have 5 cases for a family, and in that scenario it boiled down to three different rows for LSA household. This is going to give you characteristics of the household based on the clients who are served that meet the criteria of client ID and household type combination, as well as record demographics of the head of household. So we talked about how the LSA makes a determination on who is the head of household, and that's because we report out demographics based off of the single head of household. LSA household will also look at how that group of clients was served across different project types and how long. So if you're looking at household project types, we're looking at has anyone been identified as having a disability? Was anyone a veteran? Was it a children's only household? Adults with children, as well as with the number of days in different project types. Were they served for more than a year in permanent supportive housing? Were they served for more than a year in emergency shelter, safe haven, or transitional housing? All those things are going to be in categories for the LSA household, and it's going to operate the same way as we've described before, where you're going to have a number of columns with different variables, different categories, and all the way on the left, you're going to see a row total, and you're going to see the number of LSA households that meet that criteria for the row. When we're looking at LSA exit, this is a count of households based on the combination of the unique client ID of the head of household, the household type, and the cohort. So if I was enrolled on my own, I exited 2 years ago, and then again 6 months ago. Even though I was the same household type, I was the same head of household, I would be counted in 2 different rows because I exited it during 2 different cohorts. When we're looking at exits inside of a particular cohort date, we're going to be looking only at exits that have no activity for 2 weeks following the exit. That could be I have an intake in another project. That could also just be I have another open enrollment somewhere else in another residential project type. So if I had overlapping enrollments, that would count as activity, and that exit wouldn't qualify because I had activity within 2 weeks following my exit. If there's no activity, and let's say if I have 5 different exits, the LSA report wants us to identify the earliest inside the cohort that was to a permanent exit destination. If there's no exits to permanent destinations, then it's just going to say, let's use the earliest exit. And the reason why the report wants us to identify a particular exit is because we're trying to make calculations based off of, did this client return? What about, what was the exit from? What was the exit destination category? There's a column called stat, and that's determining, is this household homeless for the first time in this report period? Have they been continuously engaged? So maybe there was some engagement prior to the cohort start that we're looking at. And that's why we need to determine, that's why the LSA report determines one particular exit. So with the data in LSA person, LSA household, LSA exit, those are representing counts of particular groups of either persons, households, exit households. LSA calculated is simply a file full of different aggregate counts, also different averages. So some of the averages are how many days did people with a certain characteristic spend in this project type. It's just many different ways of asking questions about your aggregate data that are reported here. This is where we would recommend using the LSA dictionary, and the LSA dictionary is simply a spreadsheet that has, you'll have a tab for columns. You'll be able to see in what file does a particular column represent. And once you have seen the files, you've seen the dictionary, you basically just set your criteria and you read across the row. So you'll have a number of clients in the households in Project 1 who are active in the report year in any household type. That's one of the questions in LSA calculated. And there are just thousands of questions asked in that combination. So that's why with LSA calculator, I strongly recommend using the LSA dictionary. In the LSA report file, this is going to focus on the report parameters, and that's how the HDX 2.0 is going to know and validate that this is a report you ran it for, this is a system scope. It's also going to have aggregate counts of client IDs or enrollment IDs. So some of this is just to give you an idea, or give the HDX an idea of how many people enrollments are in your data, and then also give reference context for, so you have 5 clients with the same social security number. It's one thing to have that only out of 100 clients in a COC. It's totally different. It's if it's out of 1 million, a very different scope. So that's going to how you give you an overall sense of your data quality is going to be an LSA report. Now, just to reiterate, this is not a file that you have to get down to 0 data quality errors in order to upload. It is just to give a sense of what's in your system. And remember that when you upload and you're sending this up in HDX 2.0, this is the beginning of the process. We've gone quite a bit back and forth trying to determine, what is good data quality, what are the levels, and APPS has reiterated you're not going to know what's normal until people start uploading. So again, these are not things that we're supposed to get to a point of 0. So now we walk through the files kind of just in the presentation. Let's take a look at what they're going to look like. So if we open these up, I pulled these down so you have your 5 files. The ones we went through in the presentation, so let's start with LSA person. So we mentioned you will have columns with variables and those values. They're going to be across the top here. So here again we have age category. We have different identifiers and categories from that are using the LSA values, because we know that -1 is not a valid HMIS category. We're looking at in the data, if we're just looking across this row, there are 2 clients that meet this criteria, this set of variables. So that's how you would read all of these files. Once you get the hang of it, as you're looking in the dictionary, so you see here in the dictionary, this is something that will be in the handouts that we'll be sending out. You have tabs that describe different things. So you have what columns are in the different files. The main one we use quite a bit are the values tab. So you'll be able to look at, so I'm looking in the LSA person file, and I want to know what all those categories and age mean. Well, now I know.
And just on a side note, while Eric's doing this, so he's referencing HUD's LSA dictionary. We just sent out an email, so we're having some glitches with uploading the files. Once we're done with the presentation, we will upload them at the end of this, but we also, in the meantime, sent them out, so you all should have access. You'll have the copy of the current specs that we have that HUD has not uploaded the HUD Exchange yet. You'll have the most recent version of this dictionary that's not on the HUD Exchange. And you'll also have a companion Excel spreadsheet that many of the questions you all are asking, that there are explanations in the spreadsheet for strange nuances that you might not be expecting, or just generally how to understand what a column is supposed to represent. So that can be very helpful to you as well. And this particular file, the LSA dictionary, is like a decoder ring, if you will, for what those numeric values mean in the CSV files.
So as you're working with this, you're setting your filters, and like Dan used, this is the decoder ring for what these different LSA files are meant to be, or represent. So the reason why we're giving this information is not because HUD expects you to work with the files in their native format. It's to give you more information of what's in your data if you want to look at it separate from uploading into HDX 2.0, sorry. When you upload it and you get past any validation errors, you will have the ability to look at your data in more of a formatted view. So if any of you were at NHSTC and you went to the presentation on the LSA, you saw what the summary and the data export looked like, where it would give you basically what was kind of in the companion guide, but just reformatted. So it's what is the question, what is the number. So we just wanted to use this time to explain that this is, that the files look intimidating, but once you get a feel for it, you can actually do quite a bit with it and looking at your data. So here we have information about the clients themselves, the CH time and time status that we covered before. DFU status is basically if looking at whether or not they were ever fleeing domestic violence and if they're actively fleeing. And this is where we mentioned whether or not they were served in different project types. And if they were served, you will see the different household types represented. And it's also important to note that the LSA is trying to get the most amount of known data possible. So if you have someone with an unknown date of birth and it doesn't meet the rule criteria that you'll see in that companion guide, there's no way to determine what the age is, and that means you can't tell if it's an adult or a child. And that could result in an unknown household type. And if a client is served in an unknown household type and a known household type, then the LSA wants us to only report out things in known household types. So same thing with the household characteristics. If it's a veteran household, a chronic household, someone with a disabling condition, the LSA does not want to report out 99 unknown household types in those columns. As we're looking in the next file, we went through in the presentation, LSA household. I'm going to zoom in here. You essentially have the same thing where you have a row total column, so you have one household, and again, that's the unique combination of client ID at the head of household and household type that meet the criteria across all of these variables. This is where you have whether or not they stayed in rapid rehousing and they were moved in, if they had moved into permanent supportive housing, statuses for how they're served in emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing, how many days do they spend in there, and these are all LSA categories. So as we go into the dictionary, again, it's just a matter, if we're looking at this outside of HDX 2.0, we're going in and just choosing our file, choosing the column that we're looking at, and it's going to give you the value of what these, it's going to give you the decoder ring of what that number represents. So here we see an ES days category of 60. It doesn't mean that it's 60 days, it just means it's in the 31 to 60 days category, and on across the file here. So there's a lot of information. Some of you have looked at, what does visualization look like for this? It basically gives you a lot of aggregate data that you can put into Tableau, put into Power BI, and start creating some type of visualizations for you to see what's going on in community. It also will, that's some similar functionality that you'll have that'll be generated from HDX 2.0 as well. So just to kind of beat the same drum, LSA exit. It's all just aggregates, it's all just counts. So you have your row total column, you have when this exit was from, you have if they were first time homeless or not, if they were returning, where are they coming from, where are they going, did they return, and information about the characteristics of the household that was served. Again, LSA calculated. You have quite a few, so you have several thousand rows included in this. This is the test kit small data set, but you can kind of see as you're going across, you just would need to use the dictionary to see, well, what is this report row saying? So what does report row 1 mean?
And while you're looking that up, someone already noticed that the project ID is often missing, and that's intentional. HUD's logic has it so that if the universe is 10, the project ID will show up, otherwise it won't. So I just wanted to, I did answer it publicly in the QA, I just want to make sure you saw that.
Gotcha. Yes, and so for LSA calculated, there is one particular universe of project level. The others, it wouldn't make sense to add a project ID for it, because sometimes it's just all of them, it's people of certain status, or it's particular project types. So as you can kind of see, it's the report covers a lot of information, but it's just aggregate counts that are sliced and diced in slightly different ways. So you'll have your raw client data for everything for a client over a number of years about themselves and people they were served together with. And then you will have a series of summary rows and summarizations about that client. So have they ever identified as having a disabling condition? Were they ever served as a head of household? And then all those summarizations for clients and households are then aggregated together into your final count in your output files. And then for the last one, LSA report, just to give you an idea of what that looks like. Just 2 rows, and all it is just counts of things in the active year and in the 3-year time frame and on down the line. So the report itself is fairly straightforward. Again, this is to give you an idea of what data is coming out of your system and what you'll be uploading into HDX 2.0. When you do upload to HDX, you might get some information back. Sometimes you'll receive errors that you're missing data in certain fields, such as in your project data descriptor element files. Maybe it's saying you're missing household type or some other piece of information. The correction for those would be to update and correct the records in your setup data and rerun your export. Now on the setup data side, things are configured to make sure everything runs smoothly for the data collection. So you may have to go in and revisit your settings for all of those, because what you may have set to make things work or not work on the collection side for any configurations may translate into something you're not quite expecting, or that HUD is not quite expecting when it comes to the project data. Sometimes you will get information, and this is based off of our testing that we've done with HDX 2.0. You'll get a message saying that these are invalid values. These have been looked at, changed, and updated several times. And again, it might be something that's on the HDX 2.0 side, might be something that's different in the specifications, or it might be something that from an AAQ that someone sent in that there was an update or an alteration. So just be aware that if you get an invalid value, sometimes the value that's output is correct. That's happened quite often. Other errors we have seen, and that other of you have run and tested this have seen, when you have missing files or bad header count. Again, sometimes those are on the HDX side, where it's not importing the data correctly, but then also you want to make sure that the files that you're uploading are correct and that you haven't modified them in Excel in any way, that the data is in there. Once you get past the initial upload point, and it should be a fairly quick turnaround for HDX 2.0. I think they said you should get a validation yes, no, and I mean they said it should be like less than a minute. It shouldn't take a while. This goes back to
there was a period where it took an entire weekend, but yeah, it's been reduced down to like 10 seconds now, so it's much better.
Yeah. And that just goes back to the reminder that HDX 2.0 is still being actively worked. This is a brand new process for everyone. So going back to the NHSDC presentation on the LSA, they had no idea that one particular part of their exports weren't working correctly until someone uploaded the data and they realized, oh, that's not working correctly. But so if you're not getting an immediate response or you're curious, just know that a lot of things are still work in progress, but we wanted to give you as much notice as possible for you and give you time to work. Once you upload your data, you've resolved your validation errors, so there's no more missing columns or fields in your project data. They've worked out all the kinks in validation. You will have the ability to go in and look at your data in more of a formatted and visual setting, so it'll be able to let you break down things from adults only, household types, adults with children, children only, all of your data, as well as generate a series of exports that you can that kind of reformats all the raw LSA data and it'll bring it down. HUD has been sending out user guides for HDX 2.0, so please use that as a resource to go in and see, where do you go to upload your file? What can you expect from it? What do the different errors mean? And they're also having trainings and just materials that are being sent, other materials are being sent out for HDX 2.0 specifically. So that is working with your HUD report files, your what the files that HDX 2.0 and that HUD are expecting for the import process. You will also have a set of preload files that is a collection of some of the intermediate constructs that take place inside of the report. So if you've been looking through the LSA specifications, you'll notice constructs like temp person, temp household, temp exit. These are basically holding tables and work tables inside the report where you store them to say, okay, so for this head of household, this household type, have they ever been in they've been in this project type? What about this one? What about this one? So those are the work tables, and it has it down to the detail of the client ID or the head of household of the head of household of the that household type. And just as a reminder, if we're looking at these preload files, you want to work backwards because again, you will see a row in let's use LSA person, one row that says I have someone who's over the age of 25 in these characteristics. You can go into some of your preload files and then pull up the people that would meet that criteria. And the main ones that you'll see that we would recommend paying attention to, we have the exact names of the CSV files here. And I just want to call out at the very end, you have this 420 to 23. These are referring to specification step numbers. So these are the steps that are being accomplished, in this for this construct. And so you have the active person one that's really close to temp person. You have the temp household update, which is going to be very close to the temp household construct, and you have exit cohorts. So again, going to the temp exit construct. So those are just several of the files. So this is what you'll see in your preload if you download that zipped file. You have things like that look very close to the CSV file formats. Those are included. So if you want to even go a step further back and look at the raw data being considered, you have that as well. And those are all going to be ending with underscore data. And in some of these, we outputted the files just to show the steps that are being completed. Not all of them are intended to have some type of information. So some of them are just, this step has been run, this file is intentionally blank. But the ones we talked about before, on the previous slide here, you have the personal ID or the client ID over here. You have the columns that are identified in the construct and the specifications. So 3 is that they're served as both a head of household and an adult. You see what date range is being considered for their chronic homeless time, what's their age category, gender, race, and again, these are still LSA values. Then you can see the CH time and time status, and go across and see how they were served in different project types, what type of household were they served in. Whether or not it was a parenting youth household with 3 or more, with at least 3 children. So again, if we're working backwards, I would see in the LSA person, I would try to look for the series of variables I'm looking for, set those in filters, and I can pull up this one, set pretty much the same filters or close to the same filters, and obviously we have more columns in this one. And then you can go back and see, oh, these are the clients that are being counted in this particular way.
And I just want to kind of reiterate something that Eric touched on. I just wanted to kind of make it super crystal clear. These files are not your HUD compliance files, and they represent a stage of the LSA at which data is being processed. We wanted to give you as much information as possible, but don't, just remember that there are final transformations done on this to get it to the final CSV files that HUD wants. And so these are just meant to help you troubleshoot. Yeah. And, don't submit these to HTX.
Correct. Yep.
It will bomb out spectacularly.
Yep, it won't work. In the household one we looked at, so again, you have the HOH ID, which is the client ID of the head of household. You have information based on the household type, if they are chronic, so the demographics and the information about the household. This will have the specific number of days that a household was enrolled, so 124 days. These aren't LSA categories, and this is what's used to generate your averages and